Welcome to the second video in the What's in Your Backpack module. In the first video in the series, we talked about kind of current symptoms and what was going on at the time, and we mentioned about there being lots of other symptoms that might be related to your pain. And this video is very much about all the other things that might also be in your backpack. So quite often when we have chronic pain, we actually do have a myriad of other things going on and we don't necessarily connect them. And so this is a list of what are the possible stress-related conditions that you may have alongside your chronic pain. And in the next part of the sheet, in the one that you can download and fill in yourself, there's a checklist. So you can write down, which ones you've got, when you had them, when they came on, and again, see whether we can start tying those together. And it isn't quite interesting with some of these things because we don't associate them with our chronic pain. And when we start to go, oh, that might go with that, we can sometimes see actually that our pain patterns or our chronic illness patterns actually go back way, way further than we thought they might. And this is not a problem, but when we, again, that awareness and knowing about it does make a difference. And when we start to look at how many other things might be in our backpack, we can then start to see, again, what we can do about it and how we go from there. So some of the most common things that we see with people coming in with chronic pain conditions is certainly, if we go down the list here, anxiety is way, way up there. And that might not be full-blown panic attacks, but it might be that actually you're just anxious about everything anymore. Things startle you, things make you feel just agitated, you're a bit short with your family, you're worrying and catastrophizing in your head much more than you used to be. And that could be in before you had the pain, you never had that at all. And certainly, so anxiety is definitely a big one that we see a lot of. Changes in so constipation, diarrhea, irritable bowel, those are two again that we see a huge number of, and again we can be investigated for those and actually nothing comes back and there's no underlying disease or inflammatory process going on, and actually again it's an indicator of the fact that our system is feeling unsettled, overwhelmed. And then we get these changes in autonomic nerve function that does affect the way that our gut is working. Depression, again, is another common one, or low mood, and not necessarily clinical depression, but just feeling down. And I mean, being in pain makes you feel down. I completely understand that. But it's also just that not being able to lift yourself, everything feeling like there's not a lot of hope. And so that certainly, again, may well be related, not just to the pain symptoms, but to the sort of, again, the sense of overwhelm that's occurring in the nervous system. Fatigue, we've talked about, we've mentioned, but fatigue is a huge biggie. And fatigue accompanies almost all of these kind of situations. And I think we sometimes think it is part of the disease process, but actually it is often, again, a functional disorder. It's a disorder that can be changed, and we do look into fatigue, as I say, from all aspects later on in the program. From a nutritional point of view, from a blood sugar point of view, from a supplement point of view, from a sleep point of view, because again, fatigue can be the real kind of stone in the shoe about being able to get better. Because it's like that thing of, oh, I just haven't got the energy to get better. Just haven't got the energy to do these things, to make this change. And so sometimes dealing with the fatigue first is actually quite a good place to start. Fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is a condition classed as a chronic pain condition with multiple pain sites within the body. It's almost synonymous with chronic pain, really, fibromyalgia, and it's accompanied by fatigue, often anxiety, irritable bowel, brain fog. And brain fog is, again, another symptom that goes with many, many of these conditions. And again, it can be changed very often. So sort of starting to consider that and think of the body really from your nervous system's point of view, from your wiring point of view, from your computer point of view, if that makes sense. If it's overloaded, if it's got a glitch, if it's not, working properly, it then doesn't process in the way that it should. And this is the way we need to start thinking about the body. What else is going on in the system that's kind of producing glitches, and which glitches can I take out my backpack? Food intolerances is an interesting one. Food intolerances, I think, they're not allergies. Obviously, some people may have allergies ongoing, but almost as we become more sensitized within our system, we become more reactive to certain foods. And again, in the lifestyle module, we'll talk more about this, because whilst you don't necessarily have to give up, particularly things like might be gluten or sugar or dairy, sometimes just for a little while, it's worth actually taking those as the irritant out of the system, allowing your system while it's recovering to not have to deal with those, and then you can put them back in again. And we will again talk more about diet, but not necessarily in that I must never eat that again, because that becomes a pressure and a stressor. I mean, if you've definitely got an allergy, then that's definitely the case. But with the intolerances, there's sometimes a way of managing that so that actually you can, enjoy those foods again. So yeah, frequent infections. There's been some research lately too that shows that you can have temperature raised temperature through a stress response, which of course over the last few years has been, oh, have I got COVID or not? So there are massive physiological changes that occur when there's this sort of sense of dysregulation in the neural pathways. Shortness of breath is a biggie, and many people we see with pain are also struggling to be able to take a deep breath. And breathing, a bit like sleeping, is one of the key cornerstones of being well, really oxygenating your body. It's good for the health of the tissues, but it's also an incredibly important technique with regards to regulating the nervous system, calming the nervous system. And we cover in our breathing and meditation module a whole range of different breathing techniques so that you can find the one that you want that can help. So yeah, breathing, but that sort of sense of not being able to get a breath, getting really out of breath when you're exercising, that then obviously often breeds anxiety. That's a whole sort of another symptom or system of symptoms that we can look at and we'll do through the later modules. Again, we've mentioned irritable bowel, insomnia. Insomnia and fatigue in the same backpack are just, well, they're often both there, and they're unfortunate bedfellows. And they essentially, insomnia, as we mentioned in the first video, is a key thing, sometimes due to processing at night, sometimes just due to pain. So again, we'll look at that in the lifestyle module to see how we can sort of improve the sleep. Interstitial cystitis is sort of almost like irritable bladder, really. It's not an infection within the bladder, but the bladder can feel irritated. It's almost like, you keep thinking you need to go and have a wee, and actually there's really not very much to produce, and it can feel uncomfortable. Again, that can be another symptom. ME, chronic fatigue, we've mentioned fatigue. Chronic fatigue is again a symptom, and a very punishing symptom or condition, and may well be related to chronic pain and to autonomic and nervous system dysregulation. And oh God, yeah, it's just one of the worst, I have to say, from personal experience. Migraines, again, with migraines, we want to get those checked out, but if they then come back with no underlying cause, then very often they can be linked in with chronic pain conditions. Nausea, vomiting, a little bit, all that sort of gastric upset. Numbness, tingling and itching is an interesting one, because people often come in and say, yes, but I've got tingling in my hand, I think it must be a disc in my neck. Whilst we need to rule out that it's not a disc in the neck causing compression on the nerve root and giving you pins and needles in the hand, very often it isn't. And actually we can have pins and needles, tingling, burning sensations within, well, any part of the body, but particularly the limbs. And actually there again, it is a neural pathway symptom rather than an underlying damage in any way. But again, one of the ones that is quite frightening, really concerns people, like, because our understanding the sort of biomedical model is, oh, I must have pressure on there to be producing that. So again, quite often we would look into the the variants of the symptoms, where they're there, if they're excruciating, and particularly actually one of our red flags is if you have numbness around the pelvic floor and around your anal area, then that actually is something that you do need to get checked out absolutely immediately. But sometimes that numbness, tingling in other areas of the body, as long as it's transient and comes and goes and varies in sensation, is quite often can be associated with chronic pain. Obsessive compulsive thoughts, we get very, I think we can get very in our head, particularly with a pain condition. It's all consuming. And I think, therefore it's very difficult to get out of your head. We do talk later on about that being in the present moment. So actually just trying to change those patterns and be much more in the present. When we get stuck in the past, or we get stuck in the future, or worrying about the future, actually that then is an agitation to our nervous system in its own right. So palpitations, heart rate, blood pressure, all of those things again are, we can experience physiological changes with a chronic pain condition, from the way the nervous system is working. I mean, I myself certainly have ended up in hospital a couple of times being checked over, concerned about, my heart. And we always, as I say, we always recommend that you do that. But if it comes back with no no positive results, if that makes sense, then again it could be related. Restless legs, just going down the list here. Restless legs is another one that's very, very, very common, and almost that's a really good indication of what's going on in the nervous system. It's almost like it's flicky and fiery, and it's just it's got too much energy, it's got too much activity, it's not going anywhere. And also from a sort of fight-flight perspective, which what stress causes, it makes us go into that fight-flight pattern. In a fight-flight pattern, what we're doing is we're preparing ourselves to run away or to fight. That it's kept us safe for millions of years. If there was something coming to attack you, if you could either run away or kill it, essentially you were going to survive. And so the stress response is hugely, hugely important. It's just that in the time we live in now, often we are in that fight-flight place, in that readiness, but we don't need to be. And restless legs, I think, is an interesting one that is really indicative of that. And actually, if you could almost get up and run around the block, if you weren't in so much pain, then actually you would discharge that. And very often that's the way. And I say to people with restless legs, actually just I don't know, run in bed, let them move in that sense of almost discharging the energy. There are also biochemical things that can go with that, and we'll talk about that later on in the lifestyle module with regards to supplements and things. TMJ, temporomandibular joint pain, is a very, very, very common symptom that we see, and that is, I don't know whether that's because people are clenching or whether that goes with the generalized tissue tension increase that we find in many, many people with chronic pain conditions. So that's a very, very common one. You can have a tendinitis that persists, tension headache, tinnitus. Now, tinnitus is an interesting one. I certainly actually have experienced this myself. I do not know exactly, and I will look it up. I do not know exactly what the mechanism is there, but it's certainly, yeah, that, almost as your stress levels rise and your tension levels rise, you can get tinnitus, which is, ringing in the ears, which with no neurological cause, essentially no underlying, sort of disease process going on. So, many people have suffered with that for years and years and years. And I mean, certainly I'm lucky that with all the techniques that we use for the pain and for the anxiety and the stress and things, actually that meant my tinnitus went away as well. So I think there's a huge number of things. And the last one on the list here to mention really in some respects is that sort of vertigo and dizziness, that feeling. Again, it just, your body feels off when you've got a dysregulated nervous system. There's nothing wrong with it, it's not damaged, but it's not working in tip-top form. If you can just imagine a day when you're having a super duper day and you feel really well and you haven't got any pain and you've been really well rested, if you just imagine that, you can just almost feel that your nervous system in that state kind of feels like yeah, I'm all right, I've got this, Jack, it's okay. And that's really kind of where we should be more of the time. And unfortunately, what happens is we get stuck in a stress response, and it then becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, and it goes on and on and on and up and down and up and down. And I think we don't necessarily associate a lot of these symptoms with that, but they certainly can all have a link in. As I say, always recommend that you get them checked out, but just have a look and fill in on the second page of this form, you know, the ones that you've got, what ones you've had in the past, when they started, whether they're still present. And then as we go through with the symptom timelines, and in the next video when we look in back through the story a bit in a bit more detail, just see where they tie in, see if you've got any of these things, because they all start to build a pattern of what's going on, and then start to give us an indication of how we can fix them.